Are we live?
You're live.
Good morning. Welcome to Coffee Talk. We're here with Lisa.
Hi.
Hi. So we were just kind of talking about the magical joys and the the realistic adventure that raising or having kids and raising kids is. So I asked you how your morning was going.
So we're coming into this on an exactly perfect note because my child went to bed at 8:30 and was up at 1 for about half an hour, which means I can't then settle myself down for about another 2, and then my alarm went off about an hour and a half later. So, but I honestly, you don't even feel it at that point because you're so used to lack of sleep that you're kind of like, oh, okay, it's a story.
Okay. Were you a big lover of sleep before?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That's my biggest thing is how do you give up sleep?
You just, you don't choose it. You just do, because if you don't, then your child suffers either physically or mentally. And so you do. For me, I kind of got into, I think naturally, if I'm left to my own devices and I don't have responsibilities, I am very much a late night person. Let me stay up till 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I think that stems a little bit from my introversion. So let me stay up super late so that I can have my time by myself and kind of decompress the day, and then I'll move on. Well, once I got a real world job and started teaching, those hours are not conducive to that. Right. So I ended up being up pretty early, and it's a general rule anyway. I was kind of a 5:30, 6 o'clock as a general rule throughout the week because I was driving from Fruitville Road and 75 down to Venice to teach.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it was a little bit of a drive, and you've got to be there early. So I was kind of used to that schedule. And I don't know what you know about my past, but I've done a lot of childcare in my past. So I would stay overnight with kids while their parents flew out of state. And so I'd be there for a week or so. I've flown to the Bahamas with families to stay with them. And
so you're like a nanny?
Yeah, to an extent. Yeah.
Ooh,
I did some of that.
I didn't know that.
Excuse me. And so there was a part of me that knew kind of how big of a deal it was to have kids and to be responsible for them 24 hours a day. And to feel like that the kid looking at you in the middle of the night because he lost his tooth or he can't sleep or he's coughing or whatever, and he just kind of stares at you until you wake up, and that is the most horrific feeling in the world because you turn around and you're like, ah! Okay.
So you like feel that there's a presence there before you even open your eyes? Oh,
yes.
Man. That must be so scary.
And because they're not your own kids, I think there's a little bit of apprehension for them to wake you up, you know?
Right.
Or, I mean, maybe it's he said my name and I was out far enough that I subconsciously heard it, but not consciously.
Yeah.
So
Hang on, we're being told we're not getting sound. Oh, it was my mom. She said, got it. I'm guessing user error.
Poor Becky.
Mom.
Hello, Becky.
So in some of that sense, I kind of knew you're giving up a bit of your freedom because I didn't ever sleep as well when I was watching somebody's kids because I was always a little bit alert. It's a big sense of responsibility because you think if the fire alarm goes off, these kids may not wake up. I have to.
Right.
And whereas before growing up, if I'm in my own house, I would not wake up to a fire alarm. I wouldn't have to. My mom would, you know? And so it's just a shift of that responsibility that sits on your shoulders. So when I had Tristan, my pregnancy was pretty easy.
Really? Okay.
I got gestational diabetes at the end. My numbers were just on the cusp, and my readings were never as extreme as I anticipated. Like I would have pizza, and my readings would just be a little bit high, which you're not supposed to do, really, but I did.
You're like, I am pregnant.
Well, it's like, okay, I want it, and I'm going to see what it does.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit of a nuisance, and, I had the swelling and the whatever, but it was not this terrible thing. I never got to... Well, when I got pregnant, I was horrified about birth. And so everyone says, by the time you get there, you're going to be so ready to have it out of you, it's not going to matter.
Really?
And I never reached that point.
Really?
Never.
I do remember you saying, like, I'm fine being pregnant. Like, I could stay pregnant. I remember thinking, like, that must be so, it's probably a really weird feeling to have gone through all of that and then arrive there where people have told you, you're probably going to be like ready for this. And you're like, no, I'm good. Like,
and then your water breaks at 3 a.m. and you're like, oh, it's happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what do we do? And like I said, I delivered Tristan on his due date too. Okay. So I know a lot of those horror stories come if you go way past your due date, then you just really begin to feel miserable. But the birth was nothing compared to that week after.
Really?
And I did have a pretty easy birth. I did the epidural. I'm a big fan of drugs in that sense. So if you don't have to feel it, why? More power to the natural mommies. I know there are. And
was there ever a time where you were like, should I do it natural? Okay. Mm-mm. So there wasn't outside pressure for people, because I know that is a thing with natural birth and then breastfeeding. There's these things that seem to be stigmatized if you don't do it. Right. I'll put in huge quotes for the people who may not be watching, the natural way.
Right.
Like there obviously are a plethora of things that you can do to have and raise kids.
There are so many trends and there are so many hot topics right now. I'm part of a mom's group on Facebook, and it's a mom's group that's kind of tended and almost catered to that more natural and holistic approach to, extended breastfeeding. So until they're 4 or 5.
Whoa.
And amber teething necklaces and no vaccinations. And so there's a lot of moms on either side of those debates, but you'll find it a lot more accepted in that community. And so it was good for me to read kind of their questions and their responses, because it's like any group on Facebook, people get catty very fast. They get very opinionated and very catty and very disregarding of other people very quickly. So you kind of take it with a grain of salt. But I've never had a really good pain tolerance anyway, so there was never a question about the epidural. I was like, okay, I have to watch this video. How quick can I do that? Can I pull that up on my phone and get the little certificate?
Yeah. So you have to get, like, there's preparation before you can get an epidural?
There is, in theory. No one ever asked me for my certificate, so no one ever asked me for proof that I had watched it. Okay. But it's this little, 5 or 10 minute video, and it basically is outlaying the risks for you to get an epidural. These risks are minimal, but it can happen. And it's a little scary. Paralysis is one. So if
forever?
So if they miss, they can hit something really important in your back, and you can be paralyzed. So I think it's good for you to go in knowing that, but at the same time, and I've heard horror stories of it only numbed half of me or whatever, but great experience for me all around.
Did you feel like because you weren't focusing on the pain, you got to focus more on the situation, like the room, what was happening, that you were like, I'm literally about to meet my child for the first time?
Maybe, except initially, when I got there, I had a little bit of problems with my blood pressure. And so they were kind of watching me. I was on the borderline. And so she's like, how's your pain level? And I was like, it's okay. And she's like, let's give you something. And I was like, oh, is my blood pressure elevating? And she's like, yeah. So I said, well, what are my options? And she said, you can do the epidural now, or you can do this other thing. And I can't for the life of me remember what it's called. But she said it's the type of drug where the first time you get it, the best it's going to work. So you can't keep getting a hit of it. And I was like, okay, well, let's try that now. So she said, it's going to make you a little sleepy. Oh my gosh. My mom walked in the room. I was like, hi, Mom. I was so out. I could hear, actually, they had put on a Tim Hawkins DVD, and Tim Hawkins is one of my favorite comedians. And so I could hear that, but I was kind of laying there. I was half in, half out. And so by the time they came in and actually did my epidural, I was still kind of like, okay, sit here like this. Good. So as far as the magical part of that, I didn't have a lot of that. It was overwhelming because they put that baby, and he wants to be held 24/7. And that is something I was not prepared for.
Really?
In the hospital. Yeah.
Even after watching kids and doing all that, like having your own was this kind of shocking thing to be like. Well,
and if you think about it, people don't often want a babysitter until their kid is 4, 5, 6 months old.
True.
They have other arrangements at that point. So, or before that, they're either home with the kid, or they have relatives, or he's in daycare or whatever. So I had never done that really, really early stage. And that was horrifying. Plus your hormones are just all jacked up because you've just given birth and your body's everything. So, you think you're killing him every time you touch him. You run through all the scenarios. And actually when we brought Tristan home, we laid him in his little bassinet, and I literally walked around the corner to the bathroom and then walked back, and he was flailing and he couldn't breathe because he had all this gunk from being in utero in his throat. And so he was silently couldn't breathe, flailing. I lost it because I was like, what if I'd have been sleeping? Right. I wouldn't have known.
Right.
And so there's such tremendous pressure to make sure you take care of this little thing.
Right.
And I've never had anxiety or any of that kind of thing, but I could very easily see where postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, it is a thing. It's a real thing. just because of the weight of what you're doing.
Right.
And then the fact an entire life depends on you.
Right. I think the reality of it, like you actually look and you see, because I think like visiting someone in the hospital when they've just given birth and it's kind of like they're wrapped up in this cute little thing and you're just like, oh, you're so cute. And then you can give the baby back. And then you can leave. I think, and any new parent, I think, feels, and I've heard this countless times, they're going to let us leave the hospital. Like they're letting us take this thing home to take care.
There's no instruction manual.
Right. So, I mean, obviously that's the way that humans have reproduced for all of, human life. We've always given birth, raised the babies.
All
and
of history.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of the method. So women gave birth in forests and,
and they figured it out.
Right. And so I feel like it's weird because it's like we've desensitized to the weight of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just see a new mom and it's like, oh yeah, she's a new mom and you can go on with your day instead of like, look at this superwoman who's walking by. Like she just did this thing. And at least that's how I've been seeing it more and more is this, but it like adds more pressure to me because I'm like, am I even going to be able to do that? But then I'm like, women have done it since the beginning of time. But this idea of social pressure coming in to where, you look at when we were living in tribes, we had grandma, we had everybody around, like literally in the tribe to take care of this baby. And that was just the way it was. Like all the children were kind of raised by the whole group. And now
the village.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And now you see there's lots of opinions, but not necessarily
much help.
Exactly. Like I have an opinion, but let me come in by your side. It's more like from the back of a computer, you're just you should do this. And then.
Well, and even people that are interested in really helping you, particularly those early days, because your baby is eating about every hour and a half. So even in the middle of the night, you're getting up. And so you're not sleeping much. And so you're getting up to feed baby. Baby's feeding might take half an hour. And then you get about an hour to go back to sleep. And maybe you can't fall back asleep. So 45 minutes later, you're getting up to feed baby again. So the sleep factor is huge because so you're not able to be rational because you're a zombie, really, at that point. And even people that would want to help me were wanting to kind of, you're mindful of their space and of their privacy and you don't want to interfere because if you're breastfeeding, then you're half naked all the time and you don't really want people in your house, so it's a really rough balance. The meal thing is such a stereotypical thing to do, but that is so helpful. Really? Because if your kid is eating every hour and you've pretty much got to hold them the whole time, they're crying if you're not holding them because they're used to being with you 24/7 and feeling your heartbeat and all of that. So there's no cooking of meals. Anything that you can grab and go, anything you can throw in the microwave and eat with one hand is really kind of where you're living. So any kind of help you can give that's practical like that, clean for the mothers, clean for, run to Publix for them. One of the things my husband did for me when probably the second weekend, and they had told me I couldn't drive either because I'd had the epidural. They said all your ligaments and stuff are still loose. You may not be able to brake as hard as you need to.
Weeks after?
2 weeks.
Whoa.
2 weeks they didn't want me to drive. And Paulina, who, if you know Paulina, she goes to church here. She worked at that office. And so when I called him, was like, I didn't have a C-section. Like my muscles are good. Why? And she goes, it's your ligaments. Because you had the epidural, they're still pretty loose. So if you had to brake really hard, you might not be able to.
Wow.
And so you're pretty much stuck in your house then at that point. And you're stuck in your house with something that you can't put down and that stresses you out, but you adore. And so Travis came home from work and said, go to Target for half an hour. And by myself in Target was huge. Yeah. So
how'd you get there?
I drove.
Oh, no. That's why Uber exists.
Well, back then it wasn't quite a thing. I mean, it was only 3 years ago, but it wasn't quite as big a thing.
Here. No.
Yeah, not really. Yeah. So what I love is the I keep saying the reality, but like the day-to-day real world, this actually made me feel better. This is helpful. This is not so helpful. I think, is there something that's maybe global for moms? So like the meals
is huge, and cleaning is good to a certain extent, but I had trouble letting people, my house needed to be clean, but I had trouble letting people in to do that because I felt like they were going to judge the state it was in when they got there. You know what I mean? Also time by yourself, particularly if you're an introvert, like I am, Because even now my kid is 3 and my husband's in a job right now where I don't see much of him. So I'm almost single mommying it a lot of the time. And time by myself to just zone for a little bit, to read a book, to watch a show is huge, because by the time I spend an hour getting my kid to bed, I'm done. And I've been sitting in the dark room with him for a little bit and I am wiped. So I don't get any time to myself. So anything that you can do, I had a few people that offered to just watch him for half an hour or for an hour while I went and did something. And that was huge. It's just huge to have that time to yourself. And another thing I would recommend is treat them like a person. You know what I mean? Often people don't, particularly if you don't have kids, you don't know how to relate to someone who does. And so do something with them, go get coffee, you know, and let them bring their kid if they need to. Now, there are times that you do not want to have a baby around, and I didn't want to have my baby around, so I got to devote time. But let them bring their kid, because that's hard, particularly if they don't have support. And I'm in a situation where I did. You know, my mom is around, and my husband's father's around, and so we had some support. But yeah, anything they can do, bringing your kid, or particularly activities that you can do that your kid will be entertained while I hang out with you. So let me meet you at Chick-fil-A so he can go play in the play place, or let's meet at a park where I can talk to you while he plays. So
is there ever, this is probably insanely naive of me, but is there a way to, is train a proper word to use with kids?
Yes.
To train your kid to be able to like sit with you. So let's say, do they have to be entertained on their own, or can it be something that like you just kind of get your kid used to being with you when you're talking to adults and sitting? Or is it like there's no way that that's going to work because they're wild animals, so like let them go be wild animals?
Yes and no. A lot of that very much depends on the personality of the kid. I think we've talked before, Penelope, who's Holly Zenn's daughter, and Tristan were born about 5 months apart. And so before that, you have the whole nature-nurture debate. And I think both play very strongly in there. But I would have given more points to nurture prior to them being born so close together. Because even from the beginning, Penelope has been a spitfire and Tristan has been a very chill kid. I mean, even from birth, you're looking at pretty much. And so if you're talking about getting your kids used to going into a social setting with you, yes. And the way to do that is to make them come with you. And so you stick out some really terrible situations sometimes. Like I remember I needed to get a birthday present for somebody, and because I have my kid with me all the time, we were going the morning before the party. So there was no time to take him home and wait and get the present another time. And he was being a total jerk in the stores, crying and screaming because I wouldn't buy him 5 balls and, you know, all these things. And you have to, at some point, as a mother, decide that I need to put my child's development and understanding of where the line is ahead of other people's perception of me and our situation and other people's comfort. At least that's where I make the decision. Not everyone would. But it's very easy to feel intimidated in that situation when your child is screaming from the cart. And I have to still pick out a birthday present. So we're walking the aisles and he's screaming. And then he starts hitting me. And so I just push him a little bit out of arm's length and I look over here. And you have to kind of let him wrestle through that, because you don't want to pander to that. You don't want to cater to that, because then he's going to think that every time he has that behavior, he gets what he wants. And so that is a horrible feeling as a parent. But the way you train them to behave in a store is to take them in stores with you. And the way you train them to behave in a restaurant is to take them in. Now, that being said, Tristan has been a little easier than some to do that, because he is a very much of a helper. He wants to help you. He wants to please you. That's his personality. He's very sweet. If you have a very strong-willed child, that's a lot harder to do. That's much easier said than done. So to answer your question, I think it's both. I think, yes, you can put them in a situation where they can entertain themselves. And I think part of that is being very careful of the technology you allow your kids to engage in. If you're constantly pulling out your phone to entertain them, it's much easier for you as the parent, but it's teaching them that they can't entertain themselves without something to help. Now, I'm not saying that you don't pull your phone out, because I do. But I try really hard to make sure that I balance that with, when we're at home, you don't always get to watch TV. You need to play in your playroom with nothing to stimulate you except your toys and figure something out.
And your imagination, Yeah, to me, it's kind of this interesting battle in my mind, because I absolutely love sweet kids that are just like gentle and snuggly and cute. But then I also love, I mean, I know that it's way more difficult as a parent, but when I see a strong-willed kid, I'm like, you're going to be okay, because you know, like, I know that that kid's not going to let anybody.
They're going to be the CEOs
right.
of the next generation, you know?
Exactly. So it's like you either deal with them at a young age saying, oh, this is so annoying that you don't listen, that you like want to pave your own path. But then you also look at it and say that spirit shouldn't be broken. Like
right.
let them hone that and
right.
like
teach them how to deal with it appropriately.
Right.
Right.
So, okay. So how do you do that? I know that like having a sweet kid can be sometimes you don't ever want them to grow out of that, because you're like, you're the best, and you can see the goodness in there. But then you also know that type of personality could be taken advantage of.
Stepped on.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, how do you parent to where you don't, like, you don't want to turn a sweet kid into a disaster, because you're like, you got to stand up and you got to fight back. Like,
right.
like go with what their personality is saying. But are there parenting books that go for like, when you have a strong-willed child, read this one. When you have a sweet child, go for this. Or is it more like overarching, just here's how to raise a kid? Or are there kind of...
I think yes.
Okay.
I think there are some that are very tailored to the different personality types. And I think there are some that are very overarching. And I, of course, don't have all the answers. I have one child who is relatively easy. But what I have found is Susan's advice is always to kind of keep the end in mind. So if you're trying to allow this kid some freedom to stretch his wings, but you want to teach them how to do it in the appropriate manner, tell them. Even with Tristan, I will say, he's just turned 3, so his capability of understanding is there, but not strong. Mm-hmm. And so I will even say to him, every time mommy tells you to do something, it's because I want you to grow up into a nice boy, and I want you to be safe. And so you kind of are setting those parameters already, and you're saying, I'm not telling you things to boss you around. Mm-hmm. I'm not telling you things because I want to have this power struggle with you. Saturday, I'll give you a little backstory. He is at school, he still naps from like 12:30 to 2:30. They nap. Now, I cannot get him to nap for the life of me on the weekends, ever. So Saturday, we had London's birthday party in the morning, and we were going to church later on, and he was tired. Like, he was laying on the carpet playing with his cars, and kind of like, I knew he was tired. And so I was going to fight for the nap. But we're at my mom's, and there again, you're out of routine, so it doesn't go as easy. But 2 hours, I fought him to try to make him lay still. Mm-hmm. Because if he would lay still, he would fall asleep. Mm-hmm. And so I got to one point where I had put him in his bed and put up the baby gate and walked out, because I was not in a nice frame of mind. Mm-hmm. Nice mommy had left the building. So I walked out, and he came out and he shoved the baby gate down. Like, he was able to push it down flat. And I lost it. So I picked him up and I put him not so gently in his Lightning McQueen bed, and he bumped his head on the headboard. And he looked at me and goes, "That's not nice, mommy." And I was like, no, it's not. And you know what, it's not nice when you don't listen to mommy. But we had this huge thing. And afterward, I had to bring him out, and I had to say, mommy wants you to sleep because you're a much nicer boy when you sleep. Mm-hmm. And I think it's always just bringing it around, because you're going to lose your cool. Right. You're going to lose it, and you're going to act out of anger, which is one of the things that is really recommended not to do. But you're gonna. Right. And so to bring it back around and explain to him, here's why I think this is so important, and here's why I'm fighting you for this. Now, he never did nap on Saturday.
Maybe next Saturday.
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah.
So how do you, as a mom, the knowledge going into it, and I think if you have experience with kids, there is a little bit of like, okay, I think I kind of know what I'm getting myself into. Sometimes people have no interaction with kids, and then suddenly they have their own. So preparing people, and this is, I'm really, really thankful that we're having this conversation, because a lot of times it is a little scary to talk about the realities of it, because anybody can take it the wrong way if they're looking to. Mm-hmm. But I believe the more honest and open people can be, then the more prepared people can be, because they see, okay, at least I know now anger could be a part of it, and I need to watch for that and be careful of it, instead of people just saying like, no, you never get angry because you love your kids so much. It's like, well, hold on.
They don't have real kids.
Right. They have fur animals like we have. So when the feeling of you're about to lose it, because obviously there's multiple times and ways that you can just be like, this is this is getting to the point
done.
of exactly.
Yeah.
I am done with this. What do you do in that time? What's some advice for somebody who's maybe like, I can't ever control myself?
I would say best case scenario is remove yourself. I'm still in a situation where Tristan still sleeps in his crib at 3, which is not the norm at this point. Once they start trying to climb out, you typically try to transition to them to a real bed. I like the crib because it's a great cage. It's a great safe thing, I can sleep better because I know he won't get out. So for me, if I am at home by myself with him, I put him in there and I say, Mommy needs a break. And I take the time to walk out and to recoup and to kind of, and you envision the end there again. Why am I making this a big deal? Why is this a big deal? Okay. He needs to eat his vegetables, he needs to not have snacks and just survive on snacks. And so you go back in and, I think no matter how long your break takes, your brain, now you're still going to be worked up. You're still going to have a little bit, but if you can refocus and you can, at least for me, if you can have just a few minutes. Now, if Travis is home, he can often read just a little bit in my voice. And he's like, how about I take him to the park?
Yeah. It's like, Mommy really needs a break now.
That's perfect. For dad's sanity later too.
Yeah.
So a break is your best option. And like I said, you're not always going to be able to do that. But even if you can transition them to an activity that they enjoy, that you think is going to be less of a thing, like Tristan loves to take a bath. And so if I can say, okay, we're going to have a bath, because I can sit in there with him pretty much hands off because he'll play and he's got his own little things. And then that gives me time to while he's cooling, and then we can kind of start afresh. And particularly at his age, after it's been about 10 minutes, he doesn't remember it anymore. It's not a thing. Now that is different with girls. Typically girls will hang on to things for a very long time.
Really?
3 weeks ago you let her go first and you didn't let me. And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Boys are pretty direct. If they're angry with you, you know.
Yeah.
That's almost verbatim the same thing Connie Kaufman said.
Is it?
Yeah.
Like literally she used that same example about girls and boys, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's true.
They hold on to things. Yeah.
Yeah, they do. Later
Wow.
it comes to you and you're like, oh wow.
Can you imagine people with twin girls? Two
That's
at a time.
a lot of hormone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which actually they've said sometimes your morning sickness is worse if you have a girl, because
Really?
your daughter's hormones are getting involved with your hormones and they're fighting, and it makes you more nauseous.
It literally blows my mind to imagine that there is, I like to kind of refer to it as like a little alien inside of you, that there's like something that's thinking, well,
Yes.
we don't know if
and
they're
its own
thinking.
little, yeah.
Yeah, but like moving on their own. They sleep in there. They wake up in there. Like,
Yeah.
why are we so immune to this? Like, this is what's happening
I'm
on a
definitely
regular
not.
basis.
This whole thing has got me terrified.
And that is not my intention.
It's effective.
I will say there are those people, and I have really good friends. Holly Zen is one who, when she had her baby, it was like she just felt this overwhelming like beauty in it. And and she had a C-section, so it wasn't one of those natural births or anything, but she was overwhelmed with how much she could feel her love for her kid. That was never me. Like I never had that big overwhelming, he's my kid and I love him forever. And I mean, I do. But initially I was like, what am I going to do with this thing?
Right. There wasn't this flood. And a lot of people say like, you have this flood of love and then you can handle all the things that happen. And that, I mean, Ryan can kind of attest to this. That's my biggest fear, is that I have a kid and then I look and I'm like, uh-oh. Like, I don't feel that.
You wouldn't
feeling.
be the only one.
Really?
No. It's actually because I don't talk about it all the time, but when I'm with other moms, you always talk about your birth stories and your whatever. And so it comes up, and there are lots of moms who don't feel that
Really
immediately. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if your certain hormones are higher than others to make you feel that. But, I remember my memory of him was looking at him and going, oh, thank God he's cute. Which is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
But I just had this vision I was going to deliver this ugly baby and I was going to have to love him anyway. And you would. And it's such a petty concern. But I looked at him and was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
I have the same thing where I'm like, I don't want to have to hide the baby for the first few weeks or however long it takes for like their little alien face to become a little more human looking.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the thing, is with babies, they're so like, I imagine that they're just kind of like blobs where like you pick them up and move them like everywhere that they go. So that's why like I haven't even thought about the fact that you're literally holding them for the first like, what is it, weeks or months? How long?
You can start there again. Training sounds kind of cold and clinical, but you can start getting them used to not being held all the time. Another thing that kind of I knew I was going to do, you know, there's this SPOM code that you know exactly how you're going to raise your kid, and then you do start breaking rules.
Right.
You start going, I can't do that. I thought I could, and I can't. Cry it out is a big thing. It's a big hot topic. It's a big hot word. And so you let your kids basically, you're teaching them to self-soothe is the idea, that you lay them in the crib and they cry until they fall asleep. And it could be 7 minutes. It could be 45 minutes. Now, depending on whose method you use, you go in and check on them every couple of minutes and soothe them back down, and then you leave. I never could do that. And I wasn't educated enough about it that I tried it too soon. And then it was traumatic for me. Because they say you're supposed to wait till they're 4 to 6 months old, because that's when they can really start getting it. And I tried it when I was still on maternity leave, which was in the first 8 weeks.
Okay.
And it was terrible for me. And then I read later that he's traumatized because he's trying to meet his needs. And it was like, I couldn't do it after that. There again, everybody's opinion. I know people that's worked beautifully for. Stacy's one of them.
Really?
That her kids were all sleep trained that way, and it works beautifully for them. And part of me wishes we could have worked it out, because nighttime is kind of hard right now. Because we rock for a little while, then we read stories, we rock, we sing a lullaby, we lay him in his bed, and I have to sit there for a few minutes until he's kind of settled, and then I can sneak out. And that whole process usually ends up taking about an hour, which if I could have sleep trained him, what's the proper verbiage on that?
You're the expert.
I know. I was going to say.
I don't know.
You're the one I go to.
I can't believe you're asking us.
I don't know. Chris might have an opinion. He's a grammar guy.
Go ahead, Chris.
Sleep trains?
He said no.
Okay.
Sleep trained.
Yeah,
We're both
sure.
sleep trained.
Yeah.
Okay. If I could have sleep trained him, then I probably could have laid him in his crib and walked out, because I babysat for kids that were like that.
Right.
At 8 months old or 10 months old, you said night night, you sang the little poem, you laid him down, he cooed himself to sleep, which is beautiful.
Right.
I haven't been able to do that. One of the things I thought I would.
Yeah. So with having a code beforehand, and this is kind of something I've heard my mom say too, that she had 6 kids at home. Like,
God bless your mom.
I know. I honestly don't know how she did that.
Do you know what? Your mom is she's not easily ruffled.
She has become that way, yes. And I think
because she had 6 children.
Well, I think once we got old enough to where she didn't have to care for us in the sense that like we couldn't do things, and then she, you know, because if you imagine 6 kids, it's like you're basically raising, kind of like Larry's mom. She was raising kids
for 20 years
when she had grandkids.
I can't.
She was like pregnant when her grandkid was being born or something like that. It was you know the story, right?
Yeah, you just said it as far as I know.
That blows my mind. But when my mom, she used to joke that she would have a big family. Like she would joke when she was younger, like, 6 kids, as a joke, is what she told me. And then she has them, and so English is not her first language. And she basically, when she started to have kids, it became this like, okay, what is my method? I need to figure this out. I mean, when you're having kids back to back to back, you're like, okay, what's going to work? What's not going to work?
Plan.
Right.
Yeah.
And so she did more of I think there was like at the church they were going to some sort of like godly way to raise your kids. But in my opinion, there were some things that I would have said no thank you to. For instance, like there was some discipline things where I'm like, but it's a kid. Like you can't really train your kid to be a full-blown adult when they still, like I said, are kind of wild animals.
Yeah.
Are we running out of time?
Yes.
Oh,
I'm just trying to give you the subtle signal.
I know. Can I just say the subtle signal Ryan just gave me was I just see it's like an ET head just slowly going this way.
Let me explain something. It's not because I want to end. It's because you tell me that it's too long if we go past a certain mark.
So my thing is
I am.
Yeah, because we tell people we go from 8:30 to 9, and sometimes people are like, I gotta leave at 9, so I'm like, blah 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 blah. And they're like, we gotta get out of here.
So I'm just giving you the signal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So maybe we could continue this in another podcast, because I feel like we could talk about parenting for the rest of the year. Like
you're asking good questions.
Yeah,
that I don't have all the answers to.
I'm genuinely curious, and maybe Susan's watching and she can help too. But I think one of the things that Suncoast brings to the world that is valuable is they care about kids, not just in a, this is what the Bible says, or this is what my parents told me. It's like Becky lives in a kid's world, as in she understands them. She understands parents, she understands grandparents, and she wants kids to be good kids to each other, to their parents, to their families, and to also have a good
grounding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like a way to start your life to where you're going to start out on a good foot. And I don't even know if that makes any sense, but that to me is so cool. And we have so many people who are on staff in the kids area that offer insight, and they're willing to be honest and willing to help people who are struggling. And I think that's such a valuable thing to have and to offer to people.
Oh yeah. And to care for the parents, because often people are really, sorry, I know we're over, but are often very involved in the kids, and here's what you should do, but they're not very engaged in giving the parents tools to do that.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I love that we get to do. We have Parents in the Know coming up, not so subtle plug.
There you go. Perfect.
We've tried to do a series of these that we're hoping are topics that will engage the parents and prepare them to do better. Stacy did one last year on the brain. Stacy and our other panel of Autumn and April, they did a beautiful job on kind of understanding your kid's brain.
Autumn and April and Stacy. I know. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. It sounds like a beautiful, like a band, like a country band.
Oh, I was thinking a still life painting.
Yes. Like a Bob Ross. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So what is one of the things that you think Parents in the Know? So this would be the second one, and it's going to be about
our second one.
School safety.
One, is on school safety. What the schools, particularly here, are doing to keep your kids safe, and what they want parents to know on how to help with that and how not to kind of get in the way.
So what's the goal with Parents in the Know?
What we're really hoping to do, there's a few goals. The first one is to inform the parents and to just allow them a forum to have questions answered, and they're all free. That's one of the things we're really hoping for. The second goal is to connect them, because parenting can be a very isolating thing. You always feel like you are the only one going through this, or nobody else would understand this, because everybody else's kid is perfect, because we live in a social media world and everybody only posts the good. So we're hoping to network parents as well, as kind of the secondary goal.
Well, I appreciate you so much for coming on here and fulfilling my goal of saying what is the reality of parenting, because to be honest, it's not at all like this terrifying thing, or like, oh, now you're scaring me. I'm now feel like I am better prepared, because when those bad times hit, I'm not like I'm doing something wrong. That I didn't even know that there were more, that it was a common thing to look at your kid and not feel that flood of love and emotion. Like that to me, just it makes me less afraid that is my fear, you know?
I think it kind of depends on how passionate, it's maybe too cavalier of a word, but how passionate your personality is anyway. My friend Holly is very loud, very boisterous, has a very big personality, whereas I'm a little bit more reserved. And I think sometimes it has to do with that, how you feel your love and how you express your love.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, that's a good insight.
So,
yeah.
Anyway,
well,
I'll let you go.
Yeah, thanks for coming on Coffee Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
You guys
Bye.
are great. Bye.